Hello, I'm Simon Wallace. I'm one of the committee members of the Consultancy Specialist Group at BCS. You'll also be able to see the chair, who is Alan Moore, and another committee member who is Antonio Hidalgo. And Antonio is responsible for monitoring your questions and comments via the chat system. So today we have Gary Lloyd, who's talking about interviews, fact-finding and evidence. I'm not going to do long introductions for the speakers. They will undoubtedly say a bit about themselves. Gary, you wanted to set up and also do some Mentimeter stuff. So I'll leave you to tell people what they need to do.
So I'm going to talk about interviews, fact-finding and evidence. Now, in terms of Mentimeter, if you open a second browser window on any device you care to use and go to menti.com at the top of the screen there, and you don't have to log in, you just give a code, which is the one you can see at the top there. Then what you will see as I go through my slides, then I'll ask some questions. I've also taken my life in my hands that you can give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, or even a little heart on the individual slides. I've never used that facility before, so do be gentle with me. If it's all thumbs down by about halfway, I think I'll just bail out. Also, as you go through each slide, you can ask a question through that's associated with that slide, and that will appear in my in the presentation in the bottom right hand corner, and we'll see a number come up for the number of people, just like that with the questions as well. And then I'll periodically call in those questions. So if you've got a question while you think of it, just put it in and I'll try and catch up. And I have to warn you that I am going to talk quite quickly because we've got quite a lot of stuff to get through. But I hope that some of the things that I'm going to give you will act as memory joggers that you can go back to. And I've got two main things to talk about, really. What I would describe as the terrain, so what you encounter as a consultant, and the tools that you can use. So I'm hoping that when you're doing a consulting assignment, whether it's you're an existing consultant or in the future, you think about the terrain and you think about the tools. And at the end of the presentation, I'll have one slide that's got all of that on it. Now, there is the sort of consulting that I've done is mostly been program and project management, change management type, change leadership type consulting. So it's been achieving results through people. And one of my maxims as a consultant is the job, as far as I'm concerned, is to make the client look good, not make yourself look good. The great thing about making the client look good is that they get promoted and they'll always hire you in the future. So you go up with them. It's a good. Now, not everybody does that. There are some consultancies that say bad things about the client. I don't particularly think that's a good way to work myself. So I'm going to go through this, and there's the one last thing on there. We had a fabulous presentation in the Consultancy Specialist Group. I think it was the last one that we had. Martin White, I think it was. I'll reference it at the end. And he does a particular type of consultancy, which is very specialist, where you write a report about something. I've got a friend who does this as well. He does appears as an expert witness in trials and things like that. And that's where you have to go in, do a lot of fact finding. So I'll refer you out to that in case it's the sort of work that you do. But I'm going to focus on the first two things, and I'm going to cover the things that people don't talk. I don't think people talk about enough. So using Mentimeter, tell me what you think are the sources of information as a consultant. So I think I've given you the option to put in 3 words. Crunchbase. I'm just going to give it a bit more time as people see in the bottom right hand corner. I can see that there are 13 people that have contributed, but I know we've got about 50 on the call. I guess you're just figuring out how to work it. Okay, so I'm not going to dwell on it too long. People, yes. The internet, yes. Be careful what you look up on the internet. Documentation. Here's my list: surveys, modeling, experiments, observations, interviews, documentation. If we've got time at the end, I'll give you an anecdote that covers the first three of those. When I was working at NatWest, we found that there was an internal market research group, and we got them to do surveys for us about how people would react to certain things. And modeling, I'm sure a lot of people that are dealing with networks do modeling. I'm a huge fan of experiments. Sometimes you run experiments to find out information, not to find out necessarily whether something works. It's not necessarily a pilot. Watching people, very much a design thinking type approach. Interviews, which I'm going to focus on mostly, and documentation, because there are some threads running through those. But all of those are potential sources of information to you as a consultant. So what I call the terrain that I'm going to go through are emotions, and you rarely hear people talk about emotions, but emotions are really, really important. Assumptions and interpretations. So these are the things to look out for, not just when talking to somebody, but also looking at documentation. So using Mentimeter again, let me get your opinion about how people make judgments and decisions. So this is talking about emotions. Are people rational? Do people make judgments and decisions rationally or emotionally? Do they make decisions and judgments consciously or subconsciously? Let me know what you think. The numbers, as you would guess, are averages, and the moving curves show the distribution. I'm sure you all figured that out. So the consensus is coming through broadly with everybody, with the consensus sort of down the middle, really. I'll leave you to ponder that there and show you what a Nobel Prize winner said. So this is Daniel Kahneman, who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And Kahneman said, your mind is a machine for jumping to conclusions. We actually, most decisions and judgments are made emotionally and subconsciously. That's just what the research says. So in a consulting role, it's really important to be not just aware of the emotions that are in play, but also look for them, because they're quite important. If you're interviewing somebody as a consultant, what do you think the predominant emotions are that people would be feeling if you've gone into that environment? Consultant comes, or it may have happened to you. Think about what's happened to you. Consultant comes in and says, I'd like to talk to you about X. What's your predominant emotion? I love the way that fear leapt into the middle of the screen there. Big writing. Caution, suspicion, fear, wariness. The things that are coming through is I'm really pleased to see curiosity in there as well. But a lot of this is a wariness or caution. You walk into an environment and people are going to be cautious. Now, I'm going to move on and say that fear of change is completely rational. And sometimes you hear people say, oh, well, especially a consultant might say, oh, well, they're afraid of change, and as if it's an irrational thing. It's not. It's an evolutionary thing. Evolution has wired us to be constantly on the alert for change, because change tends to be a threat. That's just the way it is. And the response sometimes that people make to fear of change is, I'm going to convince you rationally why you have no need to be fearful. Now, that is that doesn't work. That doesn't work. The best thing you can do is to try and understand why the person is fears change, or they're anxious, or they're being cautious, and acknowledge that and deal with that and ask them about that. This is part of the process of building empathy, which is really, really, I think David talked about, it's really, really important. I said I was going to go quickly. So assumptions. Where do you find assumptions? That's a question I'm asking for your input here. As a consultant, where do you think you'll find assumptions? For the people I can see of a certain age, where did you find assumptions? In your head. Thank you. Everywhere. Yeah, and your biases. Thank you. That was Antonio, I'm sure. They are everywhere. Assumptions are everywhere. And as a consultant, beware that assumptions are presented as fact. Often you need to test the assumptions. How are you going to test that assumption? A classic, one of the things that somebody said about, said on there in your head, people often assume they know what the other person is thinking. They think, oh, I'm a really good reader of body language. Unlikely. If the other person is making an assumption, or you're making an assumption particularly, then test it. Ask the person as a consultant. Another classic place where one finds assumptions is in business cases. Business cases are littered with assumptions, particularly financial business cases. And this is a lesson I learned from a really great book written a long time ago now, called Lean Startup, which is to ask, how can we test assumptions as cheaply and as quickly as possible? Are we going to wait until the end of the project to find out whether our assumptions were true or not? That's actually what often happens when you think about it. So going back to that first slide, how can we do some modeling? How can we do some experiments to test those business case assumptions? By the way, I've noticed that nobody's asked me a question yet. So I'm wondering if I'm going too quickly, but I am conscious of the time. But I've got a segment for questions at the end. I'll try and get through the material. Interpretation is another thing to look out for as a consultant, which is often what people present you with is an interpretation versus an observation. So the audience were hostile to the proposal, and that might be because people sit with their arms folded or doing whatever, and you've read the body language. But if somebody presents you with some information, the thing to watch out for is it their interpretation of what happened, or is it an observation, a fact, something that they saw, that somebody said this and I interpreted it as that? So often as a consultant, you need to go digging below interpretation, looking for what led you to that conclusion. Why do you say that? Looking for an observation to try and dig into why they thought that. So sources of information again. Oh, okay. So in terms of gathering information, I've given you here 4 tools, and I'll go through those one at a time. The 6 interrogatives, the 5 whys, something called clean language, and I'll say something about empathy. So this is what journalists use. I think this is like consultancy day 1. 6 questions always that one wants answered: what, why, who, where, how, and when. You'll see this in any news story. I'm not going to dwell on it. It's something you can just use. The 5 whys comes out of Toyota, the Toyota manufacturing system, the book that changed the world, if anybody's read that, which is to get to the root by asking why 5 times. So why is that a problem? Okay, it's because of that. Okay, so why is that a problem? So why is that a problem? You can use this as a tool for the key thing is not to use it. Why can be quite a brutal question to ask, and it can feel quite aggressive. So it needs to be used with care, and sometimes one needs to take a pause and say, can we just go through a process and do that? Another question that one can use is, what would that give you? Or try and soften it in some way. But essentially the tool is to ask why 5 times to try and get to the root of something. The last one is something called clean language, which originates in psychotherapy, and it's a really good way of asking questions. The wording may seem a bit odd, but it's a really good way of asking questions without you putting any content in it yourself. And a really great question is when somebody said something, is to say, they've told you about something, and you say, is there anything else about it? And they just talk and give you more. And this is a great question, it's a non-personalized way of saying, you don't say, what would you like me to do, or what would you like X to do? You say, what would you like to have happen? It sounds a really clunky wording, but people hear the meaning of it, and it's a really, really good question. And also it's quite useful to ask what comes before X and what comes after X. Empathy. This is Chris Voss. Chris Voss used to be the FBI's chief hostage negotiator, and Chris Voss says the number one way of dealing with hostage people that have kidnapped people and taken hostages and are threatening to kill them is to develop empathy with the hostage taker. Now, actually, we can transfer this to a consulting environment. It's not that you can be talking to the hostage takers, but in terms of developing empathy is about paying attention to another human being, asking what they are feeling. Remember what I said earlier about emotions. So acknowledging the emotions and making a commitment to understanding their world. David said this, if you're genuinely curious about people, that's how you develop it. That's how you show empathy. I can see there's a question there. I'm going to come back to that at the end. Why is this? Oh, sorry, I didn't want to do that. Open the voting. Forgive me. Okay. Listening. Ask open questions. Pause after somebody has answered. Often somebody doesn't know what they think until they've said it. And if you pause, you then give them the time to reflect on that and to fill the space that you ask. And ask follow-ups. A lot of people will go in with their clipboard and I'm gonna go through my script and I'm gonna ask every question. And they ask a question, somebody gives them an absolute gem of a piece of information, but they don't ask follow-ups on it. And it's actually the follow-ups and showing curiosity that give you the empathy. This is one of my favorite things to do, which is, as a consultant, which is to seek out the complainers. I call this Beardy Baldy Bob. He sits in a corner complaining about everything. Nobody wants to talk to him and say, oh, he's just a moaner. When you go and talk to Beardy Bob in the corner, you find out that, first of all, a lot of people listen to him. And second, he's usually got some good points. So for me, particularly when I've been asked to go in to review a program or a project, I'll go around and not talk to the managers first of all. I'll go and talk to the people that are the loudest voices complaining. They generally have some point that needs to be dealt with. This was the thing that I mentioned from Martin White. This is on I think it's on the YouTube channel, and I think one can get to it from the BCS Consultancy website as well. And this is Martin White is a consultant who deals in a very specialist type of consultancy, but he's just got brilliant advice if you're a really technical consultant, that the sort of work that you're asked to do is to go in, review something and write a report. I'm not going to try and replicate what Martin did, because he would do it so much better. But if that's the sort of specialist consultancy that you do or you aspire to do, I'd suggest you really do go and look at Martin's material. I'm just going to go on to my be quiet, Siri. I'm now going to go on to the summary slide, and I'll open up the 2 questions that I've had so far. So this is the takeaway for you. In which case I can go down to a normal pace of speaking, because I know I'm just about back on time, which is sources of information. Watch out for emotions, assumptions, and interpretation. Here are some tools that you can use. And if I click down here, we'll all now see the questions come up. I often like to ask, how do you feel about it? I think that's a great question. Tick, tick. Are serial complainers always valuable, or are they sometimes just contrarian? Does it matter? They're a source of information. They may be articulating what other people. The key about serial complainers is to find out why they're complaining. That's my point of view. I don't know if any of the others on the panel have got anything else on that.
If I may add, the other good thing of start with the complainers is that, as you were saying, it's about this empathy. So you are engaging with these people which are seeing you as an amenas, as they are in a defending position, and you take on these people the earliest, you are going to start engaging with the whole team in a better way. So you will gain people on your favor in an earlier stage, which is always good.
I absolutely agree with that, Antonio. It doesn't mean you have to go with everything they say and respond to it, but it's good to sit down, listen to them. And, if you go back to what I was saying about the hostage negotiators, a very similar thing was done, an analysis by British academics looking at terrorist negotiators, and they went through hours and hours and hours of recordings of terrorist negotiations, and the people that got the terrorists to cooperate most, and these were in life and death situations, were the people that let the terrorists know that they were genuinely interested in their point of view. They wanted to understand why they thought what they did. And when they managed to make that connection, a terrorist would respond by saying, well, look, you've shown me respect. I'll tell you. And there was an article in The Guardian on this. We can reference it on the stuff we send out if we want. Now, on the thing that's on your Mentimeter at the moment, you can ask questions, and they'll just pop up here. Right,
I have I have a couple of comments from the chat, from people that couldn't enter in Mentimeter.
The chat has been very, very active, actually, Gary. If you haven't,
all right, I'll open it up.
Lots of good stuff.
Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to work backwards. I found that humour can gain people's trust. It's a double-edged sword. You've got to be really, really, really careful, I think, because people don't always share the same sense of humour. What's the comment back? Chris Voss said he gained a reputation in the criminal world. What's he say? I don't understand that, David.
Yeah, apparently Chris Voss used to describe his job. He used to say that part of his job was to sell criminals on jail time. So apparently he was so persuasive that they decided it wasn't worth speaking to him.
Oh, I see. As in
persuasiveness, you have to be careful about your reputation, I guess.
He went. I mean, Chris Voss went to Harvard to learn how to negotiate, and ended up teaching the course
that they were using at Harvard about negotiation, and they were negotiating from a rational point of view, and he negotiates from an emotional point of view, and he absolutely destroyed them.
Yeah. So that's kind of so. David, do you agree with the point about the need to build empathy?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you for that. Rudyard Kipling. I'll pass over that one for. Yeah.
There is one more thing that we were discussing that is at the beginning when we were talking about Dunning-Kahneman. Someone suggested, John suggested that this could come into, I think it was John, free will versus the determined deterministic world rather than free will. I don't know if John, can you unmute yourself?
Sure. It was just there's a recent debacle from scientists that's really upsetting a lot of people. They are arguing in increasing numbers that free will is not a thing. Now, I dare say nearly everybody on this call would probably disagree with that, but there is a lot of scientific fact that says that. So myself, I tend to disagree with that fact, I was just drawing an analogy to that at the point in time who was it? Gary was speaking. So that's all.
Yeah, the free will thing is, I don't think we've really got time to do it. But I think there's a consensus amongst psychologists these days that essentially the subconscious is in charge, and the rational mind is effectively a narrator explaining why what our subconsciouses did. But I don't see that personally, I don't see that negates free will, because my subconscious can be exerting free will. The fact that it's not part of, it's not a rational, what appears to be a conscious rational decision doesn't take away the element of free will. My subconscious is still grounded in the values and the stories about my life.
Agree entirely, Gary. Otherwise, we'd be empathizing with murderers and so forth and all sorts of things.
I think the problem is that society doesn't necessarily always let us exercise our free will, particularly in certain regimes, which I won't name. There's one other comment that I would flag up for you, Gary, from Mikala, who says that I like this use of Mentimeter. So definitely a seal of approval for Mentimeter. It was a very good session, but we should move you on. Sorry, and move on to the next speaker. So if you'd like to disconnect, Gary.
Yeah, I will do that.